Oh, buenos dias, amigos and amigas. Feliz Cinco de Mayo, a happy 5th of May. And I'm just sitting here reading my pocket U.S. Constitution, and I'm trying to figure out why so many Americans, I'm talking about Americans of non-Mexican descent, Anglo-Americans, African Americans, Cuban Americans, Colombian Americans, you name it. Why are so many of us out celebrating Cinco de Mayo or celebrating the Mexican Army's 1862 victory over France at the Battle of Puebla in the Franco-Mexican War? Well, it kind of doesn't make sense. So as I read here in my pocket Constitution, I think it says something about that. Let me read it to you. Remember the Alamo. Remember the Alamo. That's what us Anglo-Americans would say to that. Well, that's not really what I wanted to delve too deeply into today. You know, Cinco de Mayo. It just happens to be that day today. So, but it's day number 59 since my last haircut. I'm kind of going stir crazy. So I want to go outside and have an adventure here in Plaquemine today. So I tried to decide what to do, and it hit me. I want to go find a prostitute. That sounds like a lot of fun. So let's go. Let's go find a prostitute. Okay. You knew that I wasn't really going to find a prostitute today. What I'm really looking for, so to speak, is the ghost of prostitutes. I'm looking into the history of prostitution here in Plaquemine. And what you may not know is that Plaquemine used to be a hub for prostitution and gambling back in the day. I would say probably in the early 1800s was when it began, when the cattle drives were coming through here. But then later on, whenever marine traffic was heavy on the Mississippi River right here, which is right behind me, and they built the locks, when you see the lock house behind me now. So they built all that, and there were a lot of boats and barges coming through here. Men would get off those and they would come into town. They were looking for entertainment of the illicit kind. They were going to gamble their money, look for some women, some prostitutes. And so this town was really actually known as Little New Orleans by several people. As I've done research on this notorious history of this beautiful little town, you know, I've come across a lot of information. Some of it are stories that are handed down from another generation. Other things are more tangible. Like, for instance, I found this article from a newspaper in 1886. This newspaper is called the Weekly Iberville South. And they had some minutes from a town meeting in here, and this is what was written. It was from Mr. F.T. Landry as he addressed the mayor, the council. He says, "To the mayor and council of the town of Plaquemine, gentlemen, I would respectfully call your attention to the house kept by Mag, a so-called boarding house opposite my residence. I have no objection to boarding houses when they are carried on as such, but when it is the object to better carry on a house of prostitution, I think it should be stopped, and I hope your honorable body will take steps to do so." So they went on to create an ordinance that outlawed or forbid brothels and prostitution within the corporate limits of Plaquemine. So in 1886, prostitution was forbidden within the corporate limits of Plaquemine. But apparently there was still a problem with it, because in 1906 in the same newspaper, they talked about an ordinance that was unanimously adopted. And this is what it says. "Whereas complaints have been made by the citizens of the town of Plaquemine to the mayor and selectmen thereof that gross immorality exists in various parts of said town. Be it resolved that all houses of prostitution, ill fame, brothels, etc. in said town must cease such calling and be closed within the corporate limits of the district, outside the district denominated the red light district." Whoa, so now they're going to legalize it, kind of like contain it within the red light district. The cross street to the front and to the right of us is Hay Street, which is the northern border of the red light district. As we head south, we are within its borders. The levee was installed in the 1930s
and it sits on top of Bank Street. The river to the left was the eastern border of the district, and the street to the right, which is Seminary Street, was the western border that also encompassed the district. The river and levee has taken out most of the red light district. The old buildings are gone, so this area looks completely different than it did in the early 1900s. The district extended to the end of Seminary Street, which was the border of the city limits.
So I'm standing right in the middle of the old red light district where it used to be, right where illicit, immoral behavior used to take place. Right where I'm at. It's kind of weird to think about it like that. This place was similar to Storyville of New Orleans, that famed place that's no longer there either. But if you were caught outside this red light district engaging in these illicit acts, then you could be fined anywhere between $25 and $50, or you could go to jail for anywhere between 15 days and 2 months. So some pretty stiff fines there back in that day for sure. Well, in 1918, which is just 12 years later, they decided that they weren't going to do away with this district. And so they repealed their ordinance. And the reason they gave was to better protect the public health against the spread of venereal disease. I guess things like syphilis were becoming a problem. So I wonder if they wore masks and gloves back then, if they quarantined themselves. I don't know. One thing they did do is get rid of the red light district. So they moved out of here. Later on in the 1830s, this massive levee was put in place right here. So they removed a lot of buildings. And the river is high right now. But I bet if the river would go down about 30 feet, and you go out there with a metal detector, you find all kind of cool things. So that's the story of the red light district here in Plaquemine. So now I want to tell you a few stories that have been handed down and passed on to me. These are word of mouth stories. So I'm here on Railroad Avenue, and you can see the courthouse behind me. And I'm standing right in front of this law firm, DuPont and DuPont Attorneys. And next to that is a beauty salon. And on the other side of the beauty salon is another building, which is another law firm. Well, a man named Randy told me that right where this beauty salon used to be, at one time was a large 2-story building that looked like an old hotel, and it was actually a boarding house. But his dad told him that the boarding house is really just a front for a house of prostitution. So I'm at the end of Main Street now, where it intersects with Bayou Road. You can see Bayou Road behind me. I'm right next to St. John Cemetery right here, so you can get bearings of where I'm at. Well, there was a man named Harold, and he told me that his grandfather was born in 1910. And when he was about 9 or 10 years old, he did like a lot of boys his age to make extra money. They took on a newspaper route. Well, one of Harold's grandfather's routes began right here at this intersection and went down Bayou Road towards downtown. And he said along this little stretch of road right here were several houses of ill repute. And he said that as he would go down this road early in the morning, lots of times the women would be out on the porches of their houses, and they would wave at him, they would offer him candy. Can you imagine that? Prostitutes offering you candy. Well, anyway, another story goes is that these working women did not interact with the public much, the general public, because they were women of ill repute. So to go shopping, they would go into town, they'd be escorted by someone, and they would go into these stores after hours to buy what they needed. Well, Harold's grandmother said that one day she was in town and she saw after hours that a woman was going into a store, and she assumed that she was a prostitute. But later on she found out that she was an actress. It was Yvonne DiCarlo, and she was here to film a movie in 1857. The movie was called Band of Angels. So I'm going to take you down this little stretch of road and just imagine what it must have looked like years ago with these houses along it. But it's pretty desolate. Just came to Cabo's Mexican Grill to try to get some Taco Tuesday and participate in Cinco de Mayo. There is a car next to me with a screaming child in it. But the wait for food here is an hour and a half, so I think I'm gonna find other arrangements for dinner tonight. Unfortunately, I might have to do Cinco de Seis for Mexican food. It's just too busy. But anyway, this building that Cabo's is in was built in the early 1900s, around the turn of the century, maybe 1903 or 1899. It was very close in that range. And what I've been told by several people is that this building, the second floor, used to be a brothel at one time. So I don't know, they had different businesses down here, but up there they had the illicit activities going on. And there's a stairway in here, and they would say that this stairway led up to the brothel. I'm going to show it to you. Well, I made it back home, but I want to leave you with one more story before I sign off. It was told to me by one of my friends named Della. Della had a cousin here in town who owned a business, and old men would come into his business. They would sit down and they would sip on coffee and just talk and gossip. And well, anyway, sometimes an older woman would come into the establishment, and on occasion when that would happen, the old man would tell her cousin that she was one of the working girls from way back in the day. So you see, you live in a small town, everybody knows everybody and their business. It's one of the drawbacks. Could be a blessing and a curse. Well, after all this talk of fornication, I feel dirty. So I'm ready to take a bath. I'm gonna sign off of this episode of Chad's Adventures. Until next time, stay safe.